Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Before I get started in the coverage of the actual war, I wanted to discuss another content provider. This content provider is fairly popular here in the United States. While he does not get a lot of views in Eastern Europe and Ukraine, he does get quite a few views in the United States. He probably has several 100,000 Americans who actively watch what he has to say, and he discusses the ongoing war in Ukraine. Now, the problem I have with this guy is that he is not in Ukraine. In fact, this guy, Denis Davidov, from my understanding, is wanted by the Ukrainian military for avoiding military service, his military obligation. He was supposed to be conscripted and or voluntarily join the armed forces of Ukraine. He did not do that. He was smuggled out of Ukraine, and from my understanding resides now in Switzerland or another Western European nation state. He also tried to get into the United States, and the United States denied his entry into the United States to seek asylum. But again, the big problem I have with this guy is he advocates for direct U.S. involvement in this war, in this conflict, meaning that American sons and daughters should go fight in his stead while he cowardly hides in Western Europe. Now, allegedly, he claims that because he does not have any military experience, the Ukrainian military denied him volunteering. And that is just complete and utter nonsense. Look, we know he is a pilot. He has aviation skill sets. But more importantly, he speaks very good English. He could join his country's military and act as an interpreter between Western forces and Ukrainian forces. Obviously, he has aviation skills that could be put to use as well. There's just not battlefield roles that Mr. Davidov could do. There are other roles that he could certainly do in the Ukrainian military. But again, he hides in Western nation states to avoid his military obligation, and it's reprehensible. And again, Americans here in the United States tune into this guy in very large numbers to hear what he has to say, not understanding in all probability that he fled his country to avoid military service and is using this horrific conflict, this horrific war, to make money off of. That is what he is doing. So again, that is the big issue that I have with Mr. Davidov. He should have joined his country's military as he propagates a lot of false information about what's happening on the front lines in terms of what's happening on the conflict and does not serve. So that's what I have to say about that, and I wonder if he'll even ever go back to Ukraine. I think it was his chance to get out. I don't think he liked his own country. And my understanding is he doesn't even speak Ukrainian. If someone could verify that, my understanding is he only speaks Russian. So, interesting. All right, back to the ongoing coverage of the war. Again, it is now being acknowledged by Western outlets, and then finally other content providers out there on YouTube, including the coward of the county, Mr. Davidov. They have acknowledged that what we have been saying for the last several weeks, that the Ukrainian offensive, the Zaporizhzhia offensive, running from Orikhiv east to Volhodar, has failed. Now, what we are seeing is continued Ukrainian operations, these small raiding party type operations crossing the Dnieper River. They do not have an actual bridgehead. There are not pontoon bridges of Ukrainian tanks and armored vehicles crossing into the Kherson region, the eastern bank of the Dnieper River. It's not happening. There are small elements of the Ukrainian military continuing to operate in some of these areas. But at this point, the Russians really seem to have no reason to venture into this area and try to weed these Ukrainian fighters out. They are perfectly happy. The Russian forces, are perfectly happy in maintaining their defensive lines on just to the east of some of these major tributaries of the Dnieper River. So that's what we are seeing, and then now we are continuing to see the Russians attack the Avdiivka pocket. The pocket is getting tighter and tighter, and day by day, the Russians are using very large air-launched bombs against Ukrainian forces in Avdiivka. They are systematically reducing the Ukrainian ability to defend this locale through the use of very large and heavy amounts of explosives through air attack. And that's what is happening. The noose is getting tighter and tighter day by day. Yes, the Russians have taken losses. That is verifiable. But again, they have fixed large numbers of Ukrainian units. And I believe the Russians are trying to do the same thing they did in Bakhmut. This is more or less a macho thing, possibly with Zelensky, in which he orders the defense of Avdiivka at any cost. And thereby, the Russians eliminate large numbers of Ukrainian forces that are brought into this pocket to defend Avdiivka. Now, again, as you look at the map, this is a very difficult position to defend. The Ukrainians have Russian forces to their front. They have Russian forces to their northern flank. They have Russian forces to their southern flank. And more day by day, they're getting Russian forces in their rear area as well. The ability for Ukrainian forces to supply this area is becoming more and more difficult each day. This gap running from where the Russians exist in the north to the south is approximately 8 kilometers. The Russians are able to utilize any weapon system, from mortars to anti-tank guided weapon systems, in terms of having the ability to engage targets in this area. And again, as the weather continues to worsen, the ability of the Ukrainians to go overland, meaning outside of road networks, to supply these Ukrainian forces in Avdiivka is going to be very, very difficult because they're going to be limited to these roadways. And the Russians can then attack these columns that are trying to get into Avdiivka, either to provide food, water, ammunition, reinforcements, what have you. So very difficult proposition for Ukrainian forces in this, I tend to call it the Russian pocket of doom, for which it is. It is a very difficult proposition for Ukrainian forces indeed. There continues to be very heavy fighting in the north, running from Kupiansk south. And furthermore, just in terms of the strategic situation of the war, we are continuing to see and verify the expansion of the Russian military-industrial complex. At industrial sites where the Russians produce weapon systems across the Russian Federation, we are seeing the Russians expanding these locations. We are seeing new factories, new buildings popping up in these locales, and we are seeing the further expansion of the Russian military-industrial complex. And we knew this was going to happen. The Russians are in this for the long term. If the Russians perceive that they need to fight for 3 years, they are going to fight for 3 years. They see this in terms of this NATO-Ukrainian partnership as a threat that has to be eliminated. It doesn't matter what you think here in the West. That is irrelevant. It only matters what the Russians perceive. And that's why we're in this war. And that's why this war will continue. The Russians perceive Ukraine in conjunction with NATO as a threat. And that's what they are doing. They are attempting to eliminate that threat. Doesn't matter if you agree or disagree. That is what the Russian perception is. It is the Russian reality. It does not matter what Western news outlets say about the situation. Doesn't matter. It's what the Russian perception is. And that is what is going to keep this war going until the Russians, in their view, believe that they have defeated the Ukrainians, the borderlands. So that's where we sit for today. We will continue to monitor and report. Thank you for joining us. More to come very, very soon. As always, have a good day.